In this video, I am going to demonstrate some exercises that you can use for gluteal tendinopathy. But we're going to start with looking at how and why you should be using pain to guide your rehab. Also, what exercises and positions you should be avoiding because they usually just make tendon pain worse. And then we're going to look at the actual rehab exercises that does work for gluteal tendinopathy. We're going to look at how you can start with them in what usually works for most people, and then how to think about progressing them and ways in which that can work. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Maryke. I'm one of the physiotherapists from sportsinjuryphysio.com, where you can get online physiotherapy assessment as well as treatment of any type of sports injury, all done via video call. But we do specialize in tendons, and you don't have to be a top athlete. We treat anybody who likes being active. So if your type of sport is going for long walks or walking your dog, that also counts. If you want to know more about our video call service, have a look at the description of this video. I'll put a link to that there. Most cases of gluteal tendinopathy is down to overuse. So you've done too much activity, more than what the tendon was ready for, or didn't give it enough recovery time, and it's become painful and injured. Now, the most commonly injured parts of the tendons are your gluteus medius or gluteus minimus tendons. Sometimes it's a bit of both, but it's usually just a small part of the tendon that's injured. And what happens is the tendon becomes super painful and it loses a little bit of its strength. Now, it's worth saying that just because your tendon is painful doesn't mean it's very weak. It's not quite a linear thing. Often the pain system can be dialed up or dialed down depending on other things you do. And one of the most common things that makes the pain feel worse than what it should be, that it's not even related nearly to the extent of the injury, is if you try to push through pain too much and just try to ignore it. Then the body usually responds by making things just much, much worse. So the key with rehab is that you get the combination of rest and exercise right and don't overstep the mark. It's absolutely normal to feel some discomfort when you do your exercises, and it's expected, to be honest. You can't expect to wait until you're fully pain-free before you start any exercises. It doesn't work that way. Often you don't get pain-free if you just try to rest it for too long. So usually the best combination that works is what we call relative rest plus then your rehab. And the relative rest bit is not necessarily complete rest. Sometimes it is, but often it's just identifying the things that push your pain too high and that takes too long to recover from and cutting them out or adapting your week that you don't do them in the same way that your tendon can recover. When it comes to the rehab exercises, they can be specific exercises, but it can also sometimes just be increasing your general activity. This video is specifically about the exercise bit, so we're going to focus on those, but we've done other videos about how to increase your running slowly, when is it safe to do walking, and lots of other activities. So have a look at the description. I'll put links to all of those videos there. When we're injured, our bodies become really good at producing pain. And the pain intensity is not linked directly to the extent of the injury. Why is this? It's because it's a way that our subconscious is trying to warn us when you start doing something that it's worried about can make your injury worse. But because the system is effective, that alarm sounds way before you're actually doing something that's strong enough to cause any tissue damage. And you can dial that system up that it becomes too super vigilant through several things. The more that you believe something is dangerous for you or bad for you, the worse the pain system gets dialed up. Also, the research shows if you become overprotective and you try to avoid anything that gives any sensation in that area, it can dial the pain system up. So it's important to not try and avoid all discomfort or all sensations you feel there. And it's important to, if you feel something then you're really worried about your injury, just pause for a moment and ask yourself what it is that you feel. Because I've seen it, especially with back pain patients as well. When we first start movement, they'll go, no, 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 that hurts. And then I'll challenge them and just say, does it hurt? Or do you just feel something there? And often the answer is, I just feel something there. And then they can actually go on and it's absolutely fine. So for tendons specifically, the level of discomfort that's been shown that's okay is if you don't feel more than what we call a niggle level of discomfort while you're doing an activity. So that's a 1 or 2 out of 10 discomfort if you want a numeric number. It's not something you would class as pain, and it's something that if you do it at that level, you remain pretty comfortable when you stop the activity, and you don't have to actually now adapt everything else you do in that day or the next day because everything is now flared up. And that's the second thing. It's got to be at that low level while you're doing whatever you're doing, but then in the 24 hours afterwards, especially the next day. And for gluteal tendinopathy, what happens in bed that evening can often be um, tell you whether it's been too much or not. That should stay kind of at the same level of discomfort you normally feel. So the two things you're looking at is what am I feeling while I'm doing the exercises? And then also, how does this pain or discomfort react in the 24 hours afterwards? If it increases by a little bit and it calms back down quite quickly within that 24 hours or a few hours later, it's absolutely fine to continue. But if you're starting to see a trend over time that it flares up worse for the same type of exercise, it takes longer to recover from a bout of exercise. Or if you look at what you were able to do this week versus what you could do last week, and it's actually on a downward curve function wise, that can all be a sign that you're doing too much. And it doesn't have to be just the rehab exercises, it can be everything you do in the day. Because whenever we're upright, your glute tendons have to work. So standing, walking, jumping, running, all of those things work the glutes. And it's the total load on the glute tendons throughout the week that accumulates and that counts towards how much they can handle. So yes, it's useful to look at one rehab session at a time, but it's also important to look at everything you did in that day, if you get a flare up especially, plus what did you do the days before. And keep in mind that often the discomfort I wake up with today or that I had during the night is likely down to something I did the previous day. With that in mind, what are the exercises that you want to avoid in gluteal tendinopathy rehab? Well, it's any exercise that has a strong glute stretch component to it. So it's bringing the legs right up to the chest or across the body. And I'll demonstrate some common versions of that in a minute. What is the problem with that? Well, if you think of where the glutes attach and how the tendons run, when you bring your leg up or cross it over the body, it stretches the glute tendons and that then compresses them tightly against the hip bone. And when a tendon is injured, being compressed like that is a bit like pressing on a bruise. It's not necessarily doing damage, but it's really irritating it and sending the pain up. And for gluteal tendinopathy, if you have a bursitis as well, which the two often goes together, you're now squashing that bursa that's irritated already, and that's making it more angry. The tricky thing with the stretches, though, is that they often feel really good while you're doing them because it's normal for the gluteal tendons to feel tight and uncomfortable and as if you just want to stretch them out to make it feel better. But then the pain flares up several hours later. Also, in the past, because people feel so tight and when you test them, it looks as if they're tight, they were wrongly told that it's tight glutes causing the tendinopathy. And this has now been disproven in the research. It is not tight glutes, it's overuse. And the tightness you feel is actually just muscle spasm from the muscles being irritated. So if you have tight or your glutes feel really tight and uncomfortable, rather than trying to stretch it, a better option is to do ice on the muscle bellies, or you can even use heat on the muscle bellies. I would just avoid the tendon area necessarily. And you can do light massage. Massage does have a way of flaring very sensitive gluteal tendinopathy up, so you've also got to be a little bit sensitive, light with that if you're going to try that. Let me show you the exact positions that often cause trouble. In standing, it's whenever you bend the body over to one side, or if you cross your legs, that's even more, like that. Or if you're going to bring your knee up quite high, that can also cause a stretch there. When you're lying down, it's whenever you bring the leg really strongly up. Or if you cross it over the midline like this, you can feel the stretch there. Typical figure 4 stretch that people do. That will cause it as well. Or if you have one leg straight, other leg bent, and you pull it over enough way. Those are all common stretches. Also this one, where you cross it over and then you pull it like that. That's also a glute stretch. So the exercises you want to be doing instead of stretches is actually strength training exercises. But if I say the word strength training, people think that it's got to be hard exercises, and they're often quite scared of it because it sounds as if it's going to make the tendon feel worse. The strength training exercises you start with usually has to be in positions that doesn't stretch the tendon and compress it against the hip bone for the reasons we've just spoken about, because that just irritates it further, like pressing on a bruise would. So you start with really light things that match the tendon's current capacity, its level of irritability, as well as strength, and then you progress it slowly over time. So a good starting point, and I'll demonstrate them all in a minute, are isometrics. And isometrics in a neutral range where there's no stretch or compression there. Then you move on to exercises that actually move the muscles and the tendons through the range, but still avoiding a lot of the stretch and compression. And then you finally move on to exercises where you start introducing a bit of stretch and compression because the tendon has to be used to that. That's something that you do in normal daily life and you want to get back to it. So it's a stepwise approach, and your rehab should never cause a flare-up of pain that takes more than a few hours, maybe 24 hours, to settle down. But it shouldn't be a flare-up of pain. It should just be like, I'm a bit aware of it, but it's not too bad, and it comes back to my normal level within a few hours. Then you know your rehab is pitched at the right level. But as soon as you're used to it, it's got to increase slowly because you eventually want to be doing all the activities you want to be doing. So let me demonstrate some of the exercises I'm talking about. An exercise that people are often started on because it's so easy to do anywhere. And by the way, you don't have to do it on the floor. You can totally do it on a bed that's soft, especially if your other hip isn't great either. I'm just demonstrating on the floor because it's easier for me. Side leg lift, isometric side leg lift. So I want to show you the regular side leg lift first, and then we're going to discuss why you want to do the isometric version in neutral. So a regular side leg lift is when you have your leg straight down, other leg is bent up forwards, and you're just lifting it up to the side and letting it drop down as well. But can you see, if I'm going to let it drop down, that's going to cause a stretch over the outside. And if my tendon doesn't like that yet, it's likely to irritate it. So we rather want to just stop at that range so that we don't irritate it during the first stage. So to achieve that, you need to build yourself a pyramid. And you need to use several cushions or pillows until it's high enough that your hips can stay level. So what you do here is you have your leg at that position and it's fully rested at the moment. Now I'm pulling my toes up towards me because that helps activate everything. And I can just see the tips of my toes. Now, it depends on how big your boobs are and if you have any, whether you're going to see your toes or not. But the idea is that the leg shouldn't be to the front. It should be in a nice straight line. And all you do is you lift your foot a few centimeters off the cushion. So it's not as high as you can. It's literally just taking the weight off and holding it there. And then once you've done the period of time that your physio has told you to, you can relax it back down again. And that's the repetitions you do. Now, quite often, especially if we're not sure about what the delayed pain response will be, we will get patients to just start with a very gentle set first. Something like 5 to 10 second hold, rest for 10 to 20 seconds, and do a few repetitions of those. As it calms down and we can see that somebody tolerates it, we may build it up that you increase the hold times over time. There are other options that you have for that. You don't have to do the side leg lift, as you could also do a clamp. So for me, I have to again put a cushion between my legs if I want to do a clamp, because if I have it there, my hip bone is quite wide, so my leg again falls down. So I want to avoid that position. And again, you're just going to lift it a little bit. You're not going to bring it all the way up, because often if you open the clam movement up all the way, it can really irritate the tendon. So you definitely don't want to force that movement when you bring it up. You're just lifting it a little bit and holding it there before you relax it again. But also, don't do what I've just done and just go through. You always want to release something slowly because that's usually also better tolerated. Now, the way that we usually progress this exercise, but there are plenty of ways to do it, your physio may have a different way of doing it, is that we'll start off by saying then, okay, let's start moving it up and slowly down and control that movement as we go. But again, you're not forcing how high it can go up because that often irritates it. And I'm not sure why. I think it just pinches stuff. So you just stop at a comfortable height and come back down. And you can see we're still avoiding the stretch position. And the third step eventually will be to start working into stretch. But again, there's no need to go from neutral to fully flat. We tend to reduce things slowly over time. So you may work to that level, that you start working in that range, for instance, and build on that until it's eventually happy to go all the way. But quite frankly, often that going all the way only happens when you've done other exercises first. So it's not that we will always progress through those steps. We may ditch this exercise at some point, even before we get all the way to the floor, for other more useful exercises. But that's a typical way that you could introduce it and could progress it. Another common exercise that can be quite useful, especially at the early stages, but can be useful all through rehab, are bridges. You start with your heels quite close to you because that gets the glutes more, less hamstrings. It's a bit easier. And what you want to do is you want to tighten up your tummy muscles. And let me just do that. We're going to lift your bum off the floor and come into kind of a straight line. How straight you can get will depend on how tight your hips are at the front. And it's absolutely fine if you can feel you can only go to that level and things are stopping you. That's where you start and that's where you go to. We're all different. I'm quite flexible, so I can go quite high up. What you don't want to see is your back arching like that, because that's now just my back doing it. It's not my glutes doing it, really. Also, sometimes people get demotivated because they can't feel their glutes working. You cannot lift up if you're not using your glutes. Sometimes you just can't feel they're working because there's a little bit, the brain has forgotten how it feels, so it's not recognizing it. But if you're lifting up, your glutes are working. So what you do for this, for isometrics again, is you just go up into the position wherever it's comfortable and you hold it. And again, it will be starting with short holds and regular rests and building that up. The main reason why this often flares glute pain up is if people try to squeeze too hard with the glutes. That can really irritate it, or try to press too high up. That can irritate it. So if the glute bridge is hurting, I tell my patients to be very mediocre with it. Do not try your best. We're looking for a half-hearted effort. That often is tolerated much better. But in some cases, people just don't get on with this exercise. And if it doesn't work for you, there are plenty of other different exercises that can be tried, and your physio will help you find one that does actually work for you. Ways in which the glute bridge can be progressed is quite simple. You can place a weight over the pelvis and lift that up. You can start lifting up and down slowly as you go. You can do it on one leg even. But it's all about taking it in slow steps and not progressing too quickly that everything gets used to it. Then I also want to show you a totally different exercise that can also work if the side leg lift or the bridges doesn't work for you. Because like I said, there's plenty of different ways to adapt the rehab. And that's actually an isometric wall squat. What you do with the wall squat is you're using a wall so that you can control how far you go down and have it the same every time. The idea is not to go to 90 degrees, because in this angle, you're going to get the stretch again, and it's going to be really hard work. You just come down a little bit, so you can see it's a very gentle curve that you've got in your hips, and you hold that position. And that's a really good way to start building some strength and get some load through it if everything is really, really sensitive. The isometric wall squat can easily be then progressed to free squats and eventually squats with weights and even single leg squats. It all depends on who you are. If you're not an athlete or you're quite older and you just prefer to walk and you've never done strength training really, a single leg squat is definitely not appropriate. But regular squats are, because you do the squat movement as you go up and down stairs, for instance. There are plenty of different ways to adapt it, and the key is that the rehab exercises has to match what you want to be doing, as well as your tendon's tolerance for the positions they're in and the intensity they're at. The other thing I want to highlight is that it's extremely common to experience a bit of a flare-up the day after you consult a physio, especially for the first time. And the reason is that we know tendons have a way of flaring up later on. They don't often tell you in the moment that something is a problem for them. If that happens, don't just avoid all physios in the future and think that physio is bad for you. It's just that was done on that day was a bit too much because your physio didn't realize that it had to be even lighter. And it's quite common because the history don't always tell you that either. So instead, let your physio know, because there's maybe things that actually needs to be adapted in your rehab plan. Also, sometimes the exercises, you do them with your physio, absolutely fine. Next day is fine, looks all fine. And then when you do them on your own at home, now suddenly you get a flare up. Again, tell your physio about that, and they will let you know what to do to get the flare up to calm down and how to adjust things going forwards. Hope you found that useful. If you've got any questions, just ask them in the comments. And also, if you have tips to share about gluteal tendinopathy, pop that in the comments as well. That's always useful. And if you need more help with your injury, you're welcome to consult the team via video call. The link to the website is in the description of this video. Take care.